Heal your trauma or we all die. The wars we're facing, internal problems externalized. The climate crisis we're facing, internal problems externalized. The socioeconomic problems, the risks AI is posing, the problems in your own life, internal problems externalized. In this video, I'm going to explain how our trauma is at the root of the 5 biggest issues that we face as a species in this moment. I'm going to explain how healing at the root of our internal problems is likely the only way out of avoiding these 5 big crises or avoiding the potential technological dystopia. Heal your trauma or we all die. From the dawn of time, our species, our planet, has had a myriad of traumas. 4.5 billion years ago, a Mars-sized planet called Theia collided with Earth. This wasn't just a physical collision, it was Earth's first recorded trauma. It knocked the Earth off its axis by an estimated 3 degrees. It was this 3-degree shift that actually created all of life itself. Throughout Earth's history, traumas continued. Giant cats prowled the land. Massive floods reshaped the landscapes that we see today. Each trauma, each cataclysm created innovation and adaptation. Our ancestors learned how to overcome nature because nature was a threat to us. We learned how to protect our families, to build homes, to build environments that would allow us to thrive in an environment that once tried to take life from us. We did amazing. And now we are facing new threats that require us to adapt again in a different way. Our history as a species, as human beings for thousands of years, has been filled with wars and conflict. However, through these wars and conflict, we have still been adapting to where we are today. Look at Europe, a continent that was once constantly at war, now cooperates under the same currency. All of the external issues that we face as a species reflect our internal struggles and fears. Our collective consciousness, our nervous systems, our bodies, hearts, and minds are shaped by these experiences, and we co-weave an external reality together. The reality that we see and we think is outside of us is essentially just a collective set of dreams and ideas that we have co-created together. We are adapting in real time, as we always have been, and we are all a part of that co-creative process. So how do our individual lives play a role in the 5 biggest issues that we face? And how do we take control internally so that our descendants, generations from now, can actually have a world that we co-created for them? Because right now, we are in the co-creation of the world of all of our past ancestors. And the only people that have ever been able to change it and will ever change it comes from the courage and individual lives of each and every one of us. Heal your trauma or we all die. So how does the personal trauma impact the collective world that we're seeing outside? Well, it does it in many different ways. But essentially what happens is those internal fears that we have as individuals of disconnection, of separation, get projected out into the world. That the world is unsafe, that other is unsafe, that you are unsafe. And from that place, it becomes impossible to create social cohesion. It becomes impossible to create creative solutions so that we can all have our needs met here. Dysfunction creates dysfunction. It's inevitable when there's so many thousands, millions of people with so much unresolved internally. And we can look at the statistics on our mental health of our world that we're having these external problems. It becomes a lot easier to, sell products, pornography, bad food to people who are really suffering. When the trauma and experiences don't get processed through the body and nervous system, it's internalized. And then the behavior and blame gets externalized. There are whole industries that are built off the back of this, playing off the fact that human beings are disconnected. Whereas when we actually come into connection with ourselves, when we actually stop avoiding feeling what it is that we're afraid of feeling, when we start to be able to relate to ourselves and transmute and transform that trauma, we begin to change inside. Our relationships begin to change. Our communities begin to change. And that starts to have a ripple effect. Centuries ago, Buddhist teachings depicted the wheel of life, a symbol of the cycle of existence. The wheel of life illustrated that without conscious effort, we begin to remain trapped in cycles of suffering, trauma, and then the transmutation of it through practice, dance, initiation, and ritual has been a part of the human experience since our inception. We don't need to reinvent the proverbial wheel, but we do need to adapt. If we don't learn and adapt and solve the big five, humanity as we know it, or at all, might not be here in 50 years. We face climate change and environmental destruction, our disconnection itself from nature, stemming from trauma, from being at the mercy of nature. And now we're dominating it, but we've gone overboard. This is the same as someone being bullied at school becoming the bully. This behavior manifests as overconsumption, apathy, and denial of the experience itself. Then we have the challenges of artificial intelligence and technological risks. Our race here to advance technologically is fueled by collective anxieties of progress and existential threats. 30% of AI engineers said they had serious concerns about the risks AI poses, but yet here we are taking those risks. The social, political instability and the potential of economic collapse. As I shared before, if people are projecting their fears, they fight. The amygdalas in our minds are activated, and it can be nearly impossible to see eye to eye, never mind have creative, connective discussion to solve these issues for one another. We have the capacity to solve these issues, but we don't. Trauma even impacted how we respond to global health crises and pandemics. If you grew up in an environment of mistrust, you can mistrust your authority figures. It's easy to externalize that onto our governments and national agencies, especially when they give you good reason to. Unaddressed at mass scale without dealing with the root, we all die. Or we end up in a technological dystopia. Individual transmutation is essential to this next part of our development, our evolution as a species. As we do this, we move out of a space of reactivity. Our nervous systems come down from anxiety or come up from depression, and we move into a state of connectedness. We move into a state of compassion, empathy, kindness. We can begin to see the other as a part of ourselves, and as Ken Wilber said, we begin to move into a meta tier of awareness. We begin to see and feel the interconnectedness between ourselves, the plants, the animals, and one another. By healing ourselves, we can then solve these larger issues that we face, because these issues, as we can probably sense, are really just our collective issues manifested on the world stage. So as we begin to transmute and transform internally, as we begin to come home to our hearts, we're able to move into discourse and actually have discussion in politics, which we once had, versus what we're seeing on the world stage and the manipulation of social media to create these diversions and confusion, which ultimately are just separating us and polarizing us from actually being able to come together and solve these problems. So how then do we do this on a global scale? Well, the good news is that it actually only requires a small amount of people to find a sincere solution for it to spread. According to social scientist Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovations theory, you only need 2.5% of innovators to find a sincere solution before that very quickly becomes 13.5% early adopters. That then creates a ripple effect upon which the collective consciousness, the collective behavior begins to change. And this inner work, healing, what we're talking about right here, is actually going mainstream in this moment. The conversations that we're having on the world stage right now, whether that be Tim Ferriss, Jordan Peterson, Huberman, some of the biggest podcasts in the world are talking about the power of healing, plant medicine, transformation, meditation. These things are becoming a part of our global conversation. And we're very quickly moving from early adopters into the early majority. So how can you heal humanity? Here's what I believe to be the 3 fundamental key steps. The first step is that each and every one of us has to put our hands up and say, I am willing to take responsibility. I am willing to take responsibility, and often that means for things that weren't your fault, but a willingness and a courage to confront that, to transmute that, to transform that from the inside out. Step 2, reconnecting to nature. Through healing our attachment wounds of unsafety and disconnection from our own mothers and fathers, that internal space opens us up to create a connection with larger scale systems so that we can begin to move to the view that Earth is our original mother. We all come from this earth. The iron in your blood comes from her ore. The salt in your tears comes from her oceans. My point here is that through ritual, through experience, through reconnecting with nature, through plant medicine, through qigong, through meditation, through simply walking and being with nature, we can rebuild the relationship to our home planet. And therefore, with that relationship, we can have the internal desire that we want to protect her. So step one is that we've begun doing the inner work ourselves. We've begun to transmute and transform our own suffering, pain, and trauma. Step two is that we've begun to heal the relationship with our garden planet, with nature itself. And step three is the reduction of the death drive. I align with the Buddhist theory on this one, and it's the idea that is beginning to recognize that our bodies die, but our souls do not. This idea can be experienced through meditation, through ritual. It can be explained through near-death experiences. The work of Dr. Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia, or the book Life Before Life, a scientific investigation on the memories of children with past lives by Dr. Tucker. We're beginning to recognize that we are moving as all nature moves through cycles. And when we can recognize that this is one of many interconnected lives, that we are all interconnected, we can actually begin to treasure our experience. We can begin to reduce our fears, beginning to see life as a sacred simulation, beginning to see one another as sacred beings, beginning to see this planet as sacred. And from that space, we start to create a different life. We begin to relate to ourselves, to our suffering, and to one another from a different perspective. And we can start to solve many of the issues and challenges that we face as a species. But it's going to require a radical shift in our lives, our consciousness. And we have made more radical shifts throughout our history on this planet. We just look at some of our other mammalian ancestors who moved from living on land to the whales living in the ocean. There have been mammals that have made leaps. And I think this leap that we are about to make is smaller than some of those leaps, but at the same time, it is going to require us to begin co-creating a different world, a different reality together. But it begins with each of us. It begins in each and every one of our own hearts. We have to heal it inside. We have to reconnect to nature. And we have to reduce, whether it be just our anxieties, period, whether that be as far as our fear of death itself, but we have to begin to reduce our anxiety so we can slow down and truly be with life, to truly be with one another.